The Democratic Alliance says it's not surprised by the ANC's response to appeal the Johannesburg High Court's judgment, which has ordered the governing party to provide to the DA all of its records on national CADRE deployment. On Thursday last week, the Gauteng High Court in Johannesburg ordered the ANC to hand over its complete records to the DA within 5 court days. Now, the information includes meeting minutes, WhatsApp conversations, email threads, CVs, and any other documents related to the party's CADRE deployment decisions since the 1st of January 2013. Well, joining us now is Dr. Leon Schreiber. He, of course, is the DA MP and Shadow Minister of Public Service and Administration. Thanks for joining us. Good to have you on the program, Dr. Schreiber.
Good morning, Leon. Great to be here.
I suppose no real surprise that the ANC has decided to appeal the judgment, is there?
No, I don't think that is a surprise. We haven't received those court papers yet, but we accept that they intend to appeal. And I think that it really shows that the ANC is quite desperate to hide from South Africans the contents of these documents that we've asked for. The problem for them, of course, is that if you look at the judgment, it's very clear that the judge is persuaded that CADRE deployment is not only a private practice of a private organization. It is something that has very real public consequences, because when a decision is made to appoint someone on the basis of an instruction from the deployment committee, that decision has very real public consequences. Just think about load shedding and the extent to which Eskom has been denuded of skills. That is something that we as the public live with. And it therefore really infringes on a range of rights that the public holds. And I think that's the difficulty for the ANC, is that clearly, both in terms of the Zondo Commission's findings and in terms of this ruling, CADRE deployment is not something that is confined to a private space. It very much has real consequences for the public. That's why we're entitled to see what goes on there.
Yeah. The material in question that the DA expects the ANC to hand over goes back to the year 2013. Why specifically this period?
Because I think that is the most critical period for state capture. It was really from 2013 onwards that we saw the appointment of utterly unqualified individuals to state institutions. I take you back to the people appointed at Eskom, Dudu Myeni at SAA, Hlaudi Motsoeneng at the SABC, a range of examples like these. And yet we still don't quite know what the justification and the process was that led to these obviously unsuited individuals being appointed. The other important point, of course, is that it is from this particular moment, 1st of January 2013, that we know that President Cyril Ramaphosa himself became the chairman of the ANC's CADRE Deployment Committee, which means that the nexus between his role as head of this committee, which we submit illegally interferes in appointment processes, and state capture has not really been fully explored yet. And we believe that in this information, there's very likely to be evidence of President Ramaphosa's involvement in the appointment of some of these individuals, despite them being patently unsuited for the job. And I don't think that there's anything that can more clearly qualify as being in the public interest as knowledge of the president's involvement in these appointments.
Yeah. I mean, it is understandable that the people that get deployed in these various positions from local government to the National Assembly are deployed on the decision of each party. Which specific part of deployment is the DA opposed to? I mean, I know you've given us 1 or 2 examples of great failures in deployment, but perhaps you can give us a little bit more specifics on those that you are totally against.
No, it's a critical question because let me clarify what this is not about. And you'll know that we've got this Paya court case, that's the access to information one, and we also have another court challenge to actually declare the ANC's CADRE deployment policy to be unconstitutional. Neither of these cases are about political positions. In other words, if a political party gets a certain share of the votes, then of course it is their prerogative to fill seats, for example, in the National Assembly or in provincial legislatures, premiers, even down all the way to councillors. When it comes to political positions in a democracy, they must reflect the will of the voters, and that is where the party has an appropriate role. But what these cases are challenging is the extension of that political influence into the administration and the civil service. So when you think about your heads of government departments, your municipal managers at local level, and indeed your heads of state-owned enterprises, and even people working in those institutions, they are supposed to be professional public servants who are there to fulfill a career and a job in service of the people of South Africa. And they, as the Constitution very clearly specifies, must not be appointed on the basis of politics, but must be appointed on the basis of their ability to do the job. It is those appointments where we believe CADRE deployment and any form of political interference is inappropriate. And we also believe it's only by instilling that kind of professional appointment system that we are going to start fixing the failure of state service delivery that we've seen across the board.
And this is vital, because this is something that people talk about all the time. We don't even talk about it, we see it in action. I mean, we just had a great conversation that we heard Sakina having with her two guests about very similar explanations that we're given here. I mean, where, you know, we talk about councillors, we talk about CADRE deployment, we talk about these things where people are put into positions that they have absolutely no experience, number one. Some of them cannot even read and write and get into some of the most important positions. And then we ask questions like, why are things not working? Why are things falling apart? And this is where the answer lies, is that we have a fundamental problem when it comes to, and I think that this is what we've been asking viewers, we had this whole conversation about the electoral system and about who gets placed in what positions.
Well, you see, the thing with the electoral system is that at the very least, you have the ability to vote someone out who cannot do their job. But what we're talking about here when it comes to the administration is that there is no mechanism for voters to remove, for example, the head of a particular government department. There's no ability for voters to remove someone who's running SAA into the ground, as an example. Those are all appointments that should be made in terms of the law and should be based on competence and the ability to do the job. Because at the end of the day, those are the services that all South Africans rely on. And essentially, if you want to know why this CADRE deployment issue is such a big one, every single time the lights go out because of load shedding, you are living with the consequences of CADRE deployment. You are living with decades of appointment processes being corrupted so that people who don't necessarily have the skills but who do have a tremendous amount of loyalty to certain people within the ANC, can be appointed to run those institutions that they're not suited for. So when it comes to the appointments and CADRE deployment into the professional administration, the only way to fix that is by ending the practice of CADRE deployment. And now, unfortunately, the ANC, even after the release of the State Capture Commission, through people like Gwede Mantashe and the president himself, have made it absolutely clear that they are not interested in ending CADRE deployment. They could not have been more clear about this. And that is why these court challenges really are the last resort for us to draw a line in the sand here and to say, from here on forward, we have to appoint the best people if we want to have reliable service delivery and end corruption, because otherwise it is the poorest of the poor who rely the most on public services who keep paying the price over and over again.
So the DA explains, as you're saying, CADRE deployment as placing individuals who are part of a specific network to positions of influence and power, whether it's local government, state-owned entities, whatever it is, not based of their know-how, but based on their know-who. I mean, that's the simplest way of putting it.
Yeah.
So in the court papers, the party basically says it bases most of its evidence on information that was revealed during the Zondo Commission. So let me ask you, what is the DA's approach to its own deployment? I mean, for example, if you explain the DA's criteria on how you place members on local government, cannot the same be argued about the DA in some instances?
Right. So just first of all to say the information before the court includes a very short period of minutes that we actually did obtain about how the deployment committee operates. And there it's clear that there was interference in 85 appointments to 85 different institutions in the public administration and state-owned enterprises. When it comes to the DA, I think the proof is in the pudding. So the reason I say that is because when you simply respect the legally defined selection processes, which we do have in this country, then you end up, on balance, getting more qualified individuals. So what that means in the case of the DA is that there is no cadre deployment committee that meets in some smoke-filled room and then issues an instruction to mayors or to the premier and says, this is the person you must appoint into the administration. That simply does not happen. Instead, you have a selection process of which the relevant political head may be a member of that selection panel. They will receive CVs, they will interview the candidates, and they will do their level best to identify the most suited person for the role without any interference from the party. And when you look at the audit outcomes, when you look at service delivery outcomes, where the DA has an outright majority and is able, therefore, to ensure that these appointment processes run as per what the law requires, you generally end up with better outcomes. And so the simple case that we are making is let's do the same for the whole South Africa. Let's end this practice of political parties being able to say, this director general, this head of water, this head of infrastructure must come from my party. Because the person who's supposed to be a water engineer has that skill or not, regardless of what their political affiliation is. If we can apply the same model to South Africa and simply select the best people for the job, I am convinced that we will start to see an improvement over time in the quality of service delivery, as we've seen in a place like the Western Cape.
Yeah. In a nutshell, what you're arguing is that the ANC, rather than the state, has control over the functioning of the critical institutions of government, and thus all levers of power are controlled by the ANC. Now, with this kind of political system that South Africa adopted, doesn't the PR system open the country to that kind of influence, or can it be better managed?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, the link between the electoral system, essentially, and the appointment system in the administration. I think the first thing to say really is that the separation between party and state is a fundamental democratic principle. This is not something new that the DA is somehow inventing. The consequences of political interference in the administrations of government is a problem that goes back eons across the world. And every single time when you have this kind of politicization, you end up with the problems that South Africa is experiencing right now. But the key point is that in many other countries that have gone through this, there have been a set of reforms that ultimately said, listen, we can't go on like this. It is time for us to select the best from among us to serve the most vulnerable among us. And that is why you ultimately end up in country after country with merit-based appointment processes. I do think in terms of the electoral system that there is a bigger conversation to be had about the creation of constituencies, for example. The DA very much is in favor of a proper mixed system that combines the advantages of proportionality, whereby we recognize that this is a diverse society and that we do need to have the ability for a proportional representation so that one party doesn't dominate even if they don't win a majority, but to actually combine that with the advantages of having directly elected constituency-based members of parliament, for example. So that is a bigger conversation that I think we must move to. Whether that is in and of itself going to stop something like cadre deployment, I'm not convinced, because I would bet, and as we've seen from the ANC's comments after the Zondo Commission, that no matter what you do to the electoral system, that party specifically, as it is the current governing party, is very much wedded to the idea of cadre deployment. And I still think, therefore, the core challenges we've launched are really going to be the critical moments to see if we can start moving towards a professional public service.
All right, Leon, we've got to leave it there. Thank you for talking to us here on the programme. Leon Schreiber, DA, MP and Shadow Minister of Public Service Administration. Leon, I imagine you would take this to the Constitutional Court if, in fact, the ANC do win the appeal.
Yeah, we'll take it all the way.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for talking to us.